Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to just welcome everyone for joining us today, taking part in our year-long series on emerging Midwest invasives. We are recording this webinar, and just like the previous 6 that we've done this year, this will also be posted to MIPIN's YouTube channel before the end of the month. And you can access that either from the MIPIN homepage, or you can go to the same webpage where you registered for this webinar, and you'll find the link there as well. So my name is Michelle Belasker. I'm the coordinator for the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. And today we're going to be talking about Japanese chaff flower. I want to start out by just recognizing our sponsor for today's webinar, the Walnut Council. We really appreciate their generous support. The council promotes sustainable forest management, conservation, reforestation, and utilization of American black walnut and other hardwoods. So if you want to learn more about their organization and events they have coming up, visit walnutcouncil.org. And now, before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I just want to give a quick introduction to the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, or MIPIN, and a little context for this webinar. So MIPIN was formed in 2006, and we're here to coordinate among agencies and organizations across the region to address invasive species, with the goal of reducing the impact of those invasive plants in our region. And you can see from this map, when I say our region, it includes these 9 states as well as the province of Ontario. So this series was inspired by a survey we conducted about a year ago now. We asked experts across our region which species they consider to be early detection species. And when we say early detection, we mean plants that are either not in the Midwest yet, but they're in neighboring regions, or they are here, but they're still in isolated enough pockets, or isolated pockets, but in both cases, we're concerned about their potential to continue to spread, and we want to make sure they're on people's radar. So the 10 species that you see listed here really kind of rose to the top of the list of plants that were reported to us in that survey and created the basis for this webinar series. So this information is also available in a flyer that you can download from the MIPIN website. And another resource we have related to early detection plants is our Keep a Lookout flyers. We have an aquatic and a terrestrial version, each of which covers 16 different plants. And I'll put links to where you can find both of those publications in the chat once we get started. And then just finally, if you're enjoying today's presentation and this ongoing series, we hope you'll consider making a donation to MIPIN to support our invasive species education efforts like this one. And so just keep an eye on the chat. I'll be putting some links in there, both links to our sponsor website, to University of Illinois, and some of the links that I'd mentioned regarding MIPIN. So thanks so much for your attention. I know if you've been attending these, a lot of this sounds familiar, so appreciate your patience and for being here today. So I'm going to stop sharing. Chris, you can go ahead and share while I do your introduction.
Sounds good.
So Chris Evans is an extension forestry and research specialist with the University of Illinois. He focuses on forest management, forest health, and terrestrial invasive plant species. He serves as the Technical Advisory Committee Chair of the Illinois Forestry Association, and he's the co-chair of the Terrestrial Plants Committee of the Illinois Invasive Species Council. He formerly served as the Vice President of MIPIN, Vice President of the National Association of Invasive Plant Councils, as a board member for the North American Invasive Species Management Association, and as chair of the Illinois Invasive Plant Species Council. Some of his previous roles include coordinating the Illinois Invasive Species Campaign and the River to River CWMA. Chris has an MS in Forest Biology from Iowa State and a BS in Wildlife Biology from Murray State University. And he rejoined MIPIN's Board of Directors in 2020 and is currently serving as secretary. So you're in excellent hands. Go ahead and take it away, Chris.
Hey, thanks a whole lot, Michelle. So I'm very excited to be here. This is a species that I love to talk about simply because I have a lot of experience with it. I actually grew up in the area of the country right where this was first found. And so I probably have a bit of a unique experience where I've been familiar with this plant my whole life, right? Even though it is still an emerging invader to the rest of us. But what I wanted to do today is just get a sense, have you all get a sense of what this species is, kind of where it's at, and some of the reasons why we're worried about it. And I think to start out, if you don't mind, just in the chat, if you've why don't you put in, yes or no? Are you familiar with this plant? Do you currently deal with this plant? Or is this really a new plant to you? So yes, I'm currently familiar with this plant and I'm dealing with it, or no, I'm not. So if you don't mind, can you just throw that in chat so I can get a sense of people's experience with it? Okay. So yes, most people are no. Okay. Thank you very, very much. So like most people aren't familiar with it, but some people are. Um, the interesting thing that when I was putting this together, I did a version of this talk in 2021, and I had the current distribution then, and then I updated those distribution maps for this talk and was absolutely just floored by how much it spread in those last 2 years. And so I think we're reaching a point where this plant is really starting to explode and move out across the Midwest and the South and the East as well. So I think the timing is right for this species to kind of become a priority in terms of early detection and to get on more people's radar screens. So if you're unfamiliar with it, or if you're not, just kind of going over the basics, it is called Japanese chaff flower. It's Acaranthes japonica, and that basically just means chaff flower from Japan, right? That's kind of how the scientific name transliterates there. There is a subspecies here in America called, there's a certain population, it's all kind of from that one subspecies, but this is in the amaranth family. It's in that group. Some folks have branched it off into its own kind of specific family, but it is that related to the amaranths. And then there's a couple other congeners that are in North America that are found. So Acaranthes aspera is down along the Gulf Coast, and then there's two other species that are native to Hawaii. But in the kind of continental North America, there are no members of this genus that are native. Just getting into ID. So what I'll do is just lay out all the identification characteristics first, and then we're going to kind of look at them all on pictures. And I think I'll stop my video so that way you all can see the entire screen. But this is a perennial herbaceous forb. It can get 2 to 5 feet tall-ish when it's young. So the first couple years, it tends to have a single stem. As it gets older, there's multiple stems coming out from the root crown at one time. And so some of these bigger, older plants, you may have 4 or 5 stems kind of arising from that base. It has opposite entire leaves with arching venation. So it looks kind of like a little dogwood, flowering dogwood leaf, but those opposite leaves really jump out to you. The stem is stout, fairly stout, and it tends to have inflated reddish nodes. And then when it flowers, and it flowers late in the year, it has a bottle brush-like flower head made up of tiny little green petaled flowers. That's very, very compact at first, and then it elongates, and we'll look at pictures of that. And then as the fruit matures on the plant, those stems elongate and the fruit deflexes or lays flat along the stem, and there's a couple of bracts that you'll see on the fruit. And then in the winter, it dies back to kind of a bright tan thatch. So let's just kind of look at all of those characteristics in more detail. So here you can see just the basic plant. You can kind of see a lot of those characteristics on there, all the way from the little bottle brush flower, the stout stems, the inflated nodes, and the arching veins on the leaves. And this is pretty basic of what you see kind of late summer on this plant. That purple coloration is often common as well. But just jumping in and looking at the leaves, this is a plant that is easily mistaken for a lot of other plants because it kind of looks like everything, especially when it's not flowering. There's nothing that really jumps out to you. I see a lot of people say it looks like a dogwood seedling, and you can see that, right, with these opposite leaves. They're entire along the edge. They have arcing veins or arching veins, very similar to a dogwood leaf that way. So it doesn't, there's not a real knockout characteristic when it's not flowering. It just kind of looks like everything, but focus in on those arching veins and those opposite leaves. So again, you can kind of see them here. It almost looks like a basil plant. You know, it looks like a dogwood seedling, a lot of different things it looks like. If you dig in there and look at the plant, it has somewhat of a squarish stem, but then those nodes are a little inflated, and then that reddish coloration really is more common. You see that more common in there. It's not always there, but it is something that jumps out, is that kind of reddish coloration, especially right at the nodes. And then you can see, again, older plants have multiple stems. So this is a little bit of an older plant. You see two stems arising from the root crown, and then one of the stems branching out a couple times low to the ground. And that's pretty common, right? It has fairly thickened lower stems, and then multiple ones on older plants. You can even see the reddish coloration there. And then it has this little bottle brush flower. So these occur at the end of the stems, kind of coming right out of the end of it, kind of between the leaves. And then it's really, really compact at first. You can see it's a tight spike. Each of those flowers come out. They'll have greenish petals on them. And really, it doesn't look like too much, right? And it'll flower in Southern Illinois, where I'm at, late August, maybe into mid-August, you'll start seeing it flower. Yeah, maybe mid-August, it'll start flowering. And so it is late summer, even early fall is kind of when you expect to see this one to start to flower. Generally not until the 1st of August, maybe early, like late July, some of the earliest ones. You can see here the flowers are a little more mature. They're starting to open up on this plant. And it still has that bottle brush look. And so when it's flowering like this, it's very easy to pick out, just because there's really nothing else that I know of that has a flower that's similar. And then as it flowers, they do get a little more elongated. That stem elongates. You can see on the right there, the lower flowers are opening. You can see them opened up, and then even the lowest have already kind of started to convert into seeds, whereas the top of the bottle brush hasn't yet opened. If you take a close look at them, you can really see in there the flower structure, and then the open petals on that. And again, as they continue to flower, new flowers are developed on the top of the stem. While the stem elongates and it becomes no longer compact, it starts to really stretch out. The lower part of the stem is going to have, or the flowering stem will have the seeds, where you can see they're starting to deflex and lay along the stem. Then you've got a zone of active flowers, and then above that you have a zone of developing flowers. And that's pretty common, right? You see them elongating, and as the season wears on, they get longer and longer. And then later in the year, you see there's more and more seed, or more and more fruit, sorry, on it, and they're laying along what is now a very elongated stem. Each of these little fruit are single-seeded, and they lay flat against the stem, and they have these two little bracts kind of from the back of the plant, so from the base of the fruit. And so they look like little bullhorns on the seeds. This really aids them in moving these seeds around. They'll hang on to clothes and to fur and to everything else, and then get moved around that way, kind of as a hitchhiker. And it's important to look at them coming from the back of the plant, because we do have a lookalike lop seed, which has very similar fruiting characteristics, but it has the little spikes from the front of the plant, not from the front of the fruit, not the back of the fruit. So these paired bracts coming from the back of the fruit that looks like little bullhorns really is unique to chaff flower. So just to look at a full plant that is late in the season, you can see the flowering stems are all elongated and now into fruit, right? And so in September, October, it really jumps out, and it can be quite easy to identify at that point just because of the abundance of fruit on those long stems. And they'll stick around. The leaves will kind of fade away in the winter, but you can still see the stout stems and the fruit hanging on even into winter with this kind of bright colored thatch. And so a lot of times you can identify this any time of the year, especially in the winter, looking for the kind of the old dieback. And when it's thick, it really stands out as well, but you still want to look for those flowering stems, the fruiting stems along the top of the plant, with a lot of that fruit still hanging on even into the winter. And if you walk through it, brush up against it, you'll definitely understand that it's chaff flower because it hangs on to you very easily and then is transported that way. So just a couple different pictures here. The one on the left is a very young plant, so maybe the first year where it's just very small, only has a single stem, just a few fruit on it. And then the one on the right is an older plant that has lots and lots of flowers on there. You get a lot of seedlings, and the seedlings stand out by still having those opposite leaves with arching veins. So even a bed of seedlings jumps out as pretty easily identifiable if you know what you're looking for. You can see here the majority of this picture is chaff flower. There's one on the right hand here, one little Japanese honeysuckle kind of hiding in, but everything else pretty much is a blanket of chaff flower seedlings. And then this is what a larger infestation would look like, where it's blanketing a forest understory. You can see in there just a really, really thick stand of it kind of all over the place. Here's another look at a stand that is at the forest edge that's in full fruit. So again, just to highlight these identification characteristics, again, this is a perennial herbaceous forb, so it lives many years, 2 to 5 feet tall, older plants like the one in the picture, multiple stems. Those stems are often thickened, especially at the bottom. The leaves are opposite entire with arcing venation. Again, those stout stems, inflated reddish nodes, bottle brush-like flower head that's compact at first and then elongates when it forms these single-seeded fruits that lay flat along the stem. And you can find those paired bracts from the base of the fruit, and then of course the bright tan thatch as it dies back. Lookalikes, again, the biggest lookalike in the fruit anyway would be lopseed. So lopseed is a native. You'll see it growing in our forest, and the leaves are very, very different, right? So lopseed is opposite, but it has toothed leaves, serrated margins, which chaff flower never will have. But in the wintertime or fall, when the leaves start to fade back, you can still see these fruiting spikes, and they look very similar, right? They have the same idea with the fruits that lay flat along the stem. But lopseed fruits has the little bracts come from the end, little points coming out at the end of the fruit, whereas chaff flower has the bracts, the pointed bracts, the pair of them at the back of the fruit. That's the easy way to tell them apart. And you do find them together a lot. This is a picture I took the other day where we have lopseed on the left and chaff flower growing on the right. So you will see them a lot. Other things that you may see when it's not flowering, impatiens or touch-me-nots, jewelweed, I guess you'll call it, is something that grows in the same areas. There's a lot of plants that kind of look like chaff flower when it's not flowering, right? Because it really just looks like the basic plant. In terms of phenology of this species, again, it has a long germination window. So it'll tend to start to germinate early in the spring, but you'll get new germinates kind of throughout the spring and well even into midsummer. Flowering starts late summer, maybe late July or early August in the lower Midwest, even pushing back sometimes into September. The fruits start to mature early in the fall, mid to late September, and then beyond that. And then it'll start to senesce, right? It'll start to die back late October-ish or early November is when you see that falling back. Those fruits really get ripe and start falling off the plant. In terms of what the chaff flower, where it grows in terms of habitat, it does best. And so you would say it prefers moist, well-drained, rich bottomland soils, kind of the same as chaff, stiltgrass. So you see it a lot in riparian areas, bottomland forest, although it doesn't like really wet feet. So if it's in really, really wet areas or areas that have lots of flooding, you won't find it. But otherwise, it's kind of adequate soil, moisture, rich bottomland soils, it really does great. Though it will grow nearly anywhere. So I've seen it growing out of the cracks in concrete, the base of house foundations. I've seen it growing up on the top of hills and dry, kind of rocky areas. So it does kind of grow all over the place, but it performs the best in those well-drained, rich bottomland soils. It is moderately shade tolerant, so it really tends to prefer edge habitat with some sun the most. But you can find it growing anywhere from full sun into fairly deep shade. It really, really likes disturbed sites. And so any kind of soil disturbance seems to facilitate it, and you can get some truly phenomenal stands of it. So you see it a lot on roadsides, fence rows, yards, flower beds, old fields, in addition to kind of the riparian areas and bottomland forest where you'll see it moving around, particularly spread through floodwaters. So back to this picture, this is a edge of a park along a small stream in a rich bottomland soil. And so it is completely happy in this environment. You can see it's doing well and producing a ton of seed. Here it is in a ditch, a roadside, a full sun, mixed in with some different vines and beefsteak plant and a few other things, but also it's 5 or 6 feet tall in this picture and thousands and thousands of seeds. But also growing in the flower bed of a house. You can see it's doing fine there. Growing out of concrete, growing in the fence rows, just all over the place. And in a lot of places, it's becoming a yard weed in addition to a forest problem. And then just to stand here in the winter, this is an area, kind of a disturbed forest, upland forest. It's doing really well. Here it is in a pine land, another shot roadside. And then just a real heavy infestation in a pine plantation. So it grows all over the place in many, many habitats. Some of the floral associates, so the plants that we see growing with it a lot, we see a lot of times it's growing with jewelweed, stinging nettles or wood nettles, white snake root, clearweed, spice bush, jump seed, all of those we see kind of growing. There's some of the native species we see growing with it. In terms of other invasives, it grows right alongside stiltgrass or garlic mustard, hops or beefsteak plant commonly. In terms of reproduction, there's not been a lot of research on this. There's been some research mostly out of Southern Illinois University, and we're continuing to do a little more now, but pretty high seed production, 11,000 seeds per square meter in a big infestation. So it does produce a lot of seed, and that's really how it spreads around quickly. And then that seed is both water and animal spread. There's been a little research showing that it gets picked up easily on feathers, on fur of animals, things like that. Also picked up very easily on clothing. So that's my shirt on the right and my jacket on the left, both grabbing chaff flower. This is a picture of my brother's dog with chaff flower seeds all in its hair. And so it really can hitchhike very, very easily. And so you get in what's a high risk situations for this one would be, recreational areas, campgrounds, hikers, anglers, hunters, horse riding folks, any place that people use and come from different areas to come in, areas where there's roadside mowing, and then also especially streamside infestations because it is so easily spread via water. And we see it moving around quite a bit along those stream sides. It's native to Japan, North Korea, and South Korea in that region. In fact, here's a couple pictures from it in its native range. And it was first found in the US in 1981, and this was reported in a 1985 publication. And it was found in Warfield, Kentucky, in Martin County, which is all the way on the eastern side along the banks of the Tug Fork River, which is a tributary of the Big Sandy River, which is a tributary of the Ohio River. And as I mentioned earlier, that's actually right where I grew up. And so this is my parents' backyard. You can see the Tug Fork River in the background, and you can see all that chaff flower growing in the riverbank. And it's kind of a weird place for a new plant to show up in North America because it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere. And all these mountains, there's really the only thing I could think of is the railroads may have brought it in and moved it that way. But otherwise, there's no ports, there's not a lot of traffic in there, just kind of remote mountainous areas. And this was the first place it was found. But it is spread really, really aggressively through since then. So 1981, which is just over 40 years ago, it was first found in that county. And then this is the distribution now. So really has moved effectively down the Ohio River Valley into the Mississippi River Valley, as well as many other disjunct populations, satellite populations that have moved, elsewhere. And so this really represents a huge threat to the lower Midwest, the Mid-South, moving into the South and into the East, and then with that Ontario population, really has the potential to move into the upper Midwest as well. So it really can be an early detection species anywhere in the eastern United States. So even though it was first found in 1981 in eastern Kentucky, now it is in 16 states and 1 province, representing 112 different counties in those areas. If you look at EdMaps, there's 865 positive records in EdMaps, and there's an additional 633 research grade observations in North America in iNaturalist. So it really has, it's really actively spreading, actively moving throughout the region. In terms of where it's going to go next, we can continue to see spread down the Ohio River Valley, kind of occupying all those areas, and then down the Mississippi River. These satellite populations will continue to grow and spread. There's a really bad one in the Atlanta, Georgia area. As it continues to move out through people moving it from these areas or animals or water locally. And then especially this long distance spread events, it's so easy to pick up and carry on you that anybody that's recreating in the region where there's chaff flower has a real likelihood of picking it up and moving it long distances, right? So it likes to grow in areas where you may have trails, hiking trails, hunting opportunities. We found chaff flower in these areas, and so it can really be picked up. The other opportunity would be on migrating birds. So there's some research out of Korea that found that storm petrels, I think it was, were getting tangled up so much in the fruit on their feathers that it was impeding their ability to fly. So we know it picks up with really easily in bird feathers. That's the way they think it got into that island on Ontario, was actually migrating birds. So we don't necessarily know where it's going to show up next, just because of the high potential for it to spread long distances. In terms of impacts, there's not been a lot of research out there. We're still actively doing some of this. There's some research showing it may have some allelopathic properties and basically change soil chemistry. We do know it can form very dense near monoculture populations that it's so dense it can even push out other invasives. It seems to replace stiltgrass in some areas. And it can easily become the dominant species in an ecosystem, displacing native species and just dominating those systems. So again, just looking at a few slides of where we see it, it's a little video of it. It just really dominates an area, right? There's so much of it in some of these sites. Big stands of it, monocultures, heavy infestations. Here it is mixed in with stilt grass, more of it in an area. It does tend to be actually heavily browsed by deer, which is very different than a lot of our other invaders, which tend to be unpalatable. This one has a lot of deer browse. It seems to be favored by deer. We did some research with Nick Seaton, who was a master's student from SIU, and found that even though it's heavily browsed, it doesn't seem to impact its fruit set. It's able to respond to the browse and still form just as many seed as it would have if it was unbrowsed. We are currently looking at seed viability and seed bank potential. We've found so far that it's highly viable seed with nearly 100% of the fruit having viable seed. It can germinate easily that first year. We've buried some seed packets and we're looking at them so far after 1 year. A lot of the seeds are still highly viable, so we don't yet know how long they can live in the soil, but we're continuing that research to kind of try to figure that out. USDA APHIS did a weed risk assessment for this species, and it came out as high risk. And so if you look at their the area that they predicted it may be able to grow, it's throughout pretty much the entire eastern United States, east of the shortgrass prairie, and even some of the Pacific Northwest. And it ranked out, you see the little square is the chaff flower score. It ranked out right up there with a lot of the other major invaders. And so they predict that it is going to be a high risk of being one of the major invaders, in the United States, particularly the eastern United States. There's already some listing of it. So in Kentucky, it's listed as a severe threat. In Georgia, it's a Category 1 alert. Alabama, Indiana, New York, Wisconsin, Ohio, all have kind of listed it as an invader as well. So just in summary, I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. This is a problematic invader, right? It's really been shocking at how quick it's moved throughout southern Illinois, where I'm at. It was first found in 2008 in one location, and now it's you can almost not go in the woods and find it. And just to see like it replacing other species over the last 15 years has been alarming to us, which is why I'm very worried about it. So just just to review then, some key ID features: opposite entire leaves with arching venation, stout stem, inflated reddish nodes, bottle brush-like flower that elongates into as the fruit set, and the fruit are paired bracts. The whole thing deflexes and lays flat along the stem. Chaff flower has wide habitat tolerances with the potential to grow nearly anywhere, though it does prefer bottomland soils with some partial sun. Easily spread through water, floodwaters, and then through animals as well. First found in the U.S. in 1980s in eastern Kentucky, and then since then it has spread really, really rapidly throughout the whole lower Ohio River Valley and now into the Mississippi River drainage. And there's disjunct populations in many other places. So this really does have a high potential for human-aided dispersal and animal-aided dispersal for long distances. So it could literally kind of show up anywhere throughout the region. So I think regardless of where you're at in the Midwest, this should be one of those that you're keeping an eye out on and is one of your target species to try to get it in terms of early detection. The good thing about it is it's fairly easy to kill. So a lot of the standard herbicidal treatments work, whether that's triclopyr or glyphosate, at the normal rates, the normal foliar rates, seems to do a pretty good job controlling it. We've looked at fire, and fire doesn't seem to be a great option for controlling it unless it's perfectly timed. But persistent control, getting it before it sets seed, seems to be an option. It's just you have to stay ahead of the spread of it through the seed set. And then I'll leave up my my email here, and I'm definitely welcome to take questions now or if you have any questions afterwards or have anything, feel free to email me about this species.
Thanks so much, Chris. There was a question about the location in Ontario. I don't know if you can easily go back to the distribution map for a minute.
Yes, I can. Give me a second. I gotta go all the way back here. Nope. Yeah. So that little star up there.
Okay. Yeah, that was the question, just if that was the location. Did you say it was on an island?
It is. It's there's an island there in Lake Erie. There's a couple of them, and they're operated by the Parks Canada, and they found it. It's actually a neat island that has a lot of southern species, so it represents species that are pretty rare in Canada, just because they're from a little farther south. And so they were in there doing some surveys and found it there, and then they found it in several other islands along that same area.
We had a couple other questions too. They're at the end of the chat if you want to see them for yourself. But one
Sure.
of them was someone said, and you addressed this a little bit with the deer browse, but it said I noticed several of the leaves showed leaf damage where something ate on it. What potential control puts pressure on it, and what competitive advantage does it have that allows it to become invasive?
So there is again, like I said, there's a lot of animals that their insects tend to feed on it, deer tend to feed on it, and others I'm sure too. So it is a little different that way than the unpalatability that we see in a lot of invaders. We do know that it does seem to, it has some level of response, right? Like I said, we looked at clipping, and we've looked at deer browse and a few other things in deer exclusion, and it does seem to not be affected even with fairly heavy browse in terms of seed set. And so just this plant's ability to kind of handle that browse, to be able to respond to that browse and produce fruit afterwards, I think is really helping it become an invader. Just because of that, right? It can kind of tolerate that level of damage.
And then you talked about how the seeds can be waterborne. Has there been any checking for transport by river barges, particularly via ropes? Is anybody doing monitoring on that?
I don't think anybody is, but that's a fantastic comment. I think the rope's dragging it. I do know that these the rivers with Ohio or some of these tributaries, they basically get out of their banks annually. That's kind of an accepted thing, sometimes a couple times a year, and it picks that up, I'm sure, and moves it around. So I think that, yeah, ropes may be an issue for long distance spread, but downriver, I don't think it needs that. I think that the floodwaters are so effective at moving it that it's just going to march down the watershed kind of regardless.
And another question, how cold tolerant is it?
That's a good question. That's not one that we know a lot about. This was first found in the Kentucky. We haven't done a lot of cold tolerance with it. The Ontario population was a bit surprising. And then looking at with APHIS, when they did their weed risk assessment, they looked at kind of its native range and the growing zones and things in its native range, which is where they came up with that prediction that it could grow basically throughout the entire eastern United States. And so I think based upon where it grows, in its native range, it could be cold tolerant well into Canada.
And then we have a question here. I think you mentioned that it might have an opportunity to compete with Japanese stiltgrass. Have you seen that?
We have, and so certain areas that we have a lot of Japanese stiltgrass, over time we've actually seen chaff flower move in and displace and replace, I guess you would say, stiltgrass that way. So, I don't know if in the long run if stiltgrass is going to move back in and have some interplay there, but just initially when it first moved into an area, it has replaced stiltgrass, which kind of makes sense in some way. This is a taller perennial plant versus stiltgrass, which would be a bit shorter and annual. So I would say as a perennialized vegetation gets a foothold, it's going to win out over an annual one often.
And then there was a question about if it's easy to hand pull or not.
It's not actually easy to hand pull. So it does have a fairly robust root system in there. And what we found is it tends to break right at that root collar. So the stem itself will break right there instead of getting the roots out. If you have a lot of soil moisture and kind of a looser soil, you can pull it out. But most of the time, what we found is trying to pull it out is you tend to break the plant off and then it'll grow back from that root crown. So I don't think that mechanical control, unless you have the right soil conditions, is really much of an option for this one, unfortunately.
Looking at another question here. It's about treatment. I think the question is like the best timing for treatment.
Sure, that's a good question. So the problem we have with it, it does have a long germination window, and then you also have different cohorts in the same forest. So if you treat it at one time, what we've seen a lot of times, you'll kill those taller plants, and there's basically a bank of smaller plants underneath of those. So in that case, what we've had most luck with is repeat treatments in a year, where you come in um, early summer-ish when it's it's getting up there and it's getting tall enough to see it and identify it. And then you would come back later and get that kind of second rank of ones that your first spray didn't get because they were hidden underneath of the bigger chaff flowers. So two treatments, probably early summer and late summer, seems to be the most effective. Just know with a really heavy infestation, you treat it one time, you'll come back and it's a carpet of either new germinates or smaller plants that you just missed because of the tall plants.
And I think you mentioned glyphosate and triclopyr are both effective. Are there any more selective herbicides that you've used?
We have not. So we've looked at, there's nothing really that we found that's selective to this family or to this species. So unfortunately, no, right? So we've used 2,4-D and triclopyr and glyphosate and a couple others, but they're all kind of broad spectrum or broadly specific plant herbicides.
And there's a question, one more question here. Does it occur with hairy stiltgrass?
Uh,
I don't
with
know if
hairy
that's,
stiltgrass, I'm not sure what. I'm not sure what
yeah,
species they're talking about with hairy
okay.
stiltgrass.
Yeah, because we talked about Japanese stiltgrass. I'm not familiar with that term either. But if that, Judith, if you want to clarify that question with us, we'll try again. Um, okay, since herbicides are restricted and regulated in Canada, what other options are available?
Um, that's a great question. I know in Canada where they have it, there's a few more hoops they have to jump through to spray it and control it, but they are able to do that. In terms of if it's on private land or you don't have those options. I would look at something like solarization with tarps or something like that, and just keep them on there for a long time. I think those are options. I think hand pulling's not an option. Potentially, even digging them up a little bit might be an option because they aren't rhizomatous like some plants, so they don't tend to run and form rhizomes or runners or anything like that. They tend to have a well-defined root collar that you can identify with all the stems coming out of that. So, digging or using something like that to try to get the roots out. Solarization maybe. There's potential for like propane torching because I know there's been some work on that in the past. So that may be effective. Well, we haven't looked at it. And I see somebody asked about cutting below the root collar. Um, I'm guessing it will, but we haven't looked at about that specifically, whether just cutting below the root collar will work. I'd imagine that the root collar is really what you need for sprouting back since it is non-rhizomatous instead of just the roots. So that may work. But, this plant is still relatively new. It's only been found in the US for 40 years and then really hasn't had research on it until about the last 10 years. And so we're still discovering a lot of things. A lot of the research is basic ecological research at this point. So there's a lot of things that are we kind of need to continue to discover about this plant just because it's such a new invader to the continent, really.
Okay, I think we'll take this last question and then I can pop Chris's email in the chat if you have any additional questions for him. This question is for small patches, could you pull or cut at the root collar and apply herbicide at the cut?
I would imagine, so we've seen that with things like uh, knotweed or a few of these other kind of more stouter stemmed herbaceous plants where you can actually almost do a cut stump treatment on the actual the stem. So I would imagine you could do that with this or pull it up and do that. I think that's just another way to be kind of directed, although we haven't researched that specifically. So I can't say yes or no, but I would postulate that that could be effective.
Thank you so much, Chris. This is another great presentation. Just a reminder to everybody that we will be putting this recording up on MIPIN's YouTube channel. Usually get those up before the end of each month. And If you scroll up in the chat, there's a link to a fact sheet that was developed by University of Illinois and some partners on this plant. And there's some other links to other MIPN resources as well as a link to our sponsors website. And thank you again to the Walnut Council for sponsoring this particular webinar. We really appreciate that. And thanks everyone for being here. All right, we've got a lot of thank yous in the chat, Chris. So
good deal. Well, happy to do it.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.